All right, so good. Well, good morning, everybody. Really glad that you are here. And we are starting a new series that you just heard, Navigating Us, about key relationships in our life. We're going to talk about bonding relationships for most of it, those relationships that people are with us and for us. We're on the journey together. It could be family, friends, coworkers, church people, so on. And then bridging relationships that we need to flourish as well. Purposeful relationships with people who are different from us. So we'll be looking at various relationships. And we just heard the song, such a sweet song from Curious George is when I heard it, movie. I can tell that we were going to be friends. And an appropriate time of the year, right? A lot of people started school this week. Either if you're a student, you started school maybe this week, or you have kids who started this week. And when you start school, your kids start school, or if you can think back to when you were in school, if you're not, then, when you went to school that first week or that first day, or you had some concerns, and maybe you had some academic concerns, but really you were thinking about friends. And am I going to be able to make friends? Like if it's a new school, am I going to be able to make friends? Or, man, I'm going to see my friends. Are they still going to be my friends? Are they going to be friendly? The people who were my friends last year, are they going to be my friends again? How all that's going to go. And when your kid comes back and they tell, how did school go? You're probably talking about friends because there's a very tender part of us as human beings designed for that kind of connection, and that we don't graduate from that. That doesn't go away. As adults, we still are built that way. It's just when we graduate from school and get into normal life, it's so much harder to build those connections and relationships because life pulls us in so many different directions, especially in the culture in which we live. It keeps getting harder and harder to have real connection. And we see that and feel that in our culture. In fact, at this point in the talk, I was going to give a bunch of statistics to show how disconnected we are and how lonely our culture is growing. But I don't think I need to do that. I think we just know that, don't we? I mean, it's just the way things are. And I heard an interview about that on a podcast a couple weeks ago with a fascinating guy that I've followed for a long time. His name is Robert Putnam. He's a Harvard researcher and professor that has devoted his life to human flourishing and human connection. But he wrote a book about 30 years ago called Bowling Alone. And the reason he called it Bowling Alone is because at the time, there was a trend where bowling as an industry was still vibrant, but bowling leagues were going down the tubes. Like people weren't bowling in leagues, they were bowling alone. And he saw that as a metaphor for our culture. That was 30 years ago. So on this interview, he's 84 years old now. He was talking about that. He said, man, he could not have foreseen the smartphone and all the digital stuff and what that would do to real connection, and how his life's work, which was trying to reverse the trends from disconnection to connection, he's like, it's all gone the wrong direction. And he talked about how he was at 84, as he looks back at his life, fighting discouragement, thinking, have I done anything? But I think he might be encouraged because just a couple weeks ago, a new study came out that showed some significant reversal in the trend of disconnection to connection, especially for a particular group of people that you might be that group. Because what they did is they were focused on young adults, but they looked at young adults in our culture, people 18 to 34, and they were looking at is there a difference in feelings of meaning and connection, purpose and connection for those who are churched versus those who are not churched. And what they found was pretty fascinating. So 75% of young adults who were a meaningful part of the church said they feel like they have a meaningful, impactful life. 49% of those not connected said the same thing, which is a pretty massive gap. In connection, it's even bigger. So when they looked at young adult men, they found that young adult men in our culture who are not part of church, 27% felt like they had a really significant connection with somebody. 68% of churched young men felt like they had a meaningful connection with somebody. That's massive. And with young adult women, it was a 21-point difference between the two, which means some of you I know are visiting or whatever, but for those of you who are a regular part of this church, you're already a big step ahead on your way to the kind of connection we're created for. But also, we also know that just watching online or sitting in a row and listening is really not going to be what makes those bonding connections bond in a significant way. So how do we do that? And whether it's with other people in church, friends, whether it's our families, or however we want to bond with people, how does bonding happen? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Starting next week, we'll look at individual relationships, types of relationships, and say how could God help us bond those closer together? But today, in general, how does bonding happen? It's kind of like somewhere I have, yeah, there it is, this little piece of Velcro, which has got to be one of the best inventions ever. Love Velcro. Just doing that is fun, right? Much less being able to practically do stuff. But all Velcro is on one side, and it's hard to see, right? Because it's so tiny, but it's just these little hooks on one side. And on the other side, a bunch of loops. It's hooks and loops. And the stronger the connection is dependent on how many hooks and loops there are that hook and loop. And so what we're going to talk about today is what are some of the hooks and loops in our key relationships that can bond us together. We're going to see 3 really powerful hooks and loops. And I want you to think about a relationship or two that you would love to get closer as we think about this. And the way we're going to do that, the way we're going to see them in the Bible, in the New Testament, is kind of an unconventional passage. It's in the book of Romans, and book of Romans is an incredible book in the New Testament. Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, wrote it. It's amazing. In fact, there's so many passages in the book of Romans that people will that are so rich that people will like print them out and put them on their wall, or they'll memorize them, or some people will cross-stitch them and stick them on a pillow or something. And Romans is incredible. But the passage we're gonna be in, Romans 16, nobody's ever made a pillow out of this one. Nobody's ever put verses on the wall, I don't think, from the passage that we're gonna be looking at. And you're gonna understand why. Because honestly, it's one of those passages that if you're trying to read through the New Testament, I'm gonna read through the New Testament, and it's one of those passages that makes you wanna quit. Because it's Paul greeting people that he knows and his friends that are in the Roman church. And so it's just all these great so-and-so, great, all these hard to pronounce names. And it's typically a passage you skip. You probably will never hear, except today, a sermon on this passage. However, there's a reason it's in there, because there's gold here, if you want to understand human connection. Because what it is like a selfie. It's a snapshot of part of Paul's relational world. And I'm gonna read the whole passage. It's 16 verses. You have to really stay with me, bunch of names. We can do it. 9 o'clock did not do well, but I'm feeling strong for 11, okay? Because in between the lines, I want you to listen to, wonder why he was so deeply connected and listen for some of these bonds. And so here we go, Romans 16, let's focus. I commend you to our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church in Cenchrea. I ask you to receive her in the Lord in a way worthy of his people, and to give her any help she may need from you, for she has been a benefactor of many people, including me. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in Christ Jesus. They risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful to them. Greet also the church that meets at their house. Greet my dear friend Epaenetus, who was the first convert to Christ in the province of Asia. Greet Mary, who worked very hard for you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews who've been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. Greet Ampliatus, my dear friend in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our co-worker in Christ, and my dear friend Stachys. Greet Apelles, whose fidelity to Christ has stood the test. Greet those who belong to the household of Aristobulus. Greet Herodian, my fellow Jew. Greet those in the household of Narcissus who are in the Lord. Greet Tryphena and Tryphosa, which we believe were twins, those women who worked hard in the Lord. Greet my dear friend Persis, another woman who's worked very hard in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who's been a mother to me too. Greet Asyncritus, Phlegon, Hermes, Patrobas, Hermes, and other brothers and sisters with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister, and Olympus, and all the Lord's people who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. You did it. Got through it. But there's yeah, you can, amen. But there's a lot there. And when you look between the lines of this snapshot, Paul had the kind of connection, the kind of relationships that you and I want. There's a depth of connection here. And in between the lines, you can see why. And we're going to see three connectors. And the first one is a very powerful one, and that is shared mission. So it linked them together, a common commitment to Jesus and his mission, and they served together over a period of time. So when you look at Paul, when you look at this selfie, when you look at this snapshot, one of the things that you'll notice if you really look at it is that this is a very diverse group of people. His friendship world, his relational world was very diverse in lots of ways. For example, socioeconomically diverse. People all along the social strata. And one of the ways you know that is the name. So 2,000 years ago in the Roman world, people were named and then renamed in ways depending on their social status that names meant a whole lot more. You could tell a lot more about a person than today. Like my name is Jeff. You just heard another Jeff, two Jeffs today. And Jeff is one of those names that just kind of like, whatever, Jeff. But it does tell you something. It tells you that I'm at least 40 years old because people don't name their kids Jeff anymore. It does not appear in the top 100 baby name list anymore. And I think we should bring it back. Some of you are pregnant. Come on, Jeffrey or Jefferina, what a name, okay? Let's bring it back. But whether we bring that back or not, right, it doesn't mean much. But you could tell a lot about names. So people who are scholars who understand that have looked at these names, and one thing they've found is that a little over half of these names are people who were either slaves in the Roman Empire or had been slaves, either current or former slaves, which tells us they were at the lower end of the social strata. But you also have people at the very upper end, like Phoebe says is a benefactor or a patron. We're going to talk about that later, but that means she was very wealthy, very connected. You had other people like Priscilla and Aquila and Narcissus who had big enough houses that they meant they were wealthy. So you had the upper end and the lower end and others in between. So it's very diverse that way. It was also diverse racially. You have Jews and Gentiles. In the New Testament, when it talks about Gentiles, that's just people who aren't Jews. So you have the Jewish race and the other races. And when you look at the names, there was a lot of diversity in the Gentile names. They were people from lots of different cultures, lots of different races and ethnicities. So they had that difference. And then gender as well. 11 of his selfie group were women, 14 were men. So Paul, as a man, single man, he was not alone. He was deeply connected with other people, and of his people that he was really connected to in Rome included women and men and this race and that race and ethnicity and this, the whole thing, like very diverse. So that tells you something right there. We'll come back to that at the end of the series, the importance of diversity. But what drew these very diverse people in common? Like what drew them together? What did they have in common? Because bonding relationships are about people that we have something very important in common with. Well, what they had in common was a commitment to Jesus and his mission on this planet. And they served together, shared mission. And they had served together for a long time in a way that serving together and not just eating donuts and talking with each other, but actually serving together and doing ministry together and serving the poor together and whatever you're doing, that bonds together in a way that few things will. Now you see that in this group. We know more about Priscilla and Aquila than we do anybody else on the list. Priscilla and Aquila were husband and wife, Priscilla the girl, Aquila the guy. And they were tight with Paul and had served with him in ministry. They were pastors, so to speak, we would call them today. That's not what they call people back then. But they were on Paul's ministry team in Corinth when Paul started the church in Corinth. We have 1st and 2nd Corinthians. They served together. We know that from Acts. And then in the book of Acts, we also know that when Paul went to start the church in Ephesus, he took Priscilla and Aquila with him, and together they started this church. And so they served together for years in ministry, and develop this bond, because there's something about serving over especially a period of time that bonds in a powerful way. I saw a more modern picture of that this last week. I had the privilege of meeting with two younger leaders in our church, college students, Aiden and Sam, who grew up in this church. In fact, Aiden, I use this illustration at 9 o'clock, and his sister, Aiden's sister, came up to me and showed me pictures of Aiden and Sam when they were like 6 and 7 years old and were buddies together in this church. And as they went into junior high and high school ministry, they were student leaders, and they led together and served in the student ministry together. And then in college, both of them were interns and residents here and still serve together. Aiden leads our college ministry. Sam is at A&M, so he just went back. Any whoops, or whatever you say out there. And okay, and yeah, more power to you. So he's over there and doing that, great place. And but anyway, before we went back, we met together to talk about some things, and great conversation. So it was them two, and across from me was Jack Warren, who's on our staff. He's one of our executive pastors. So we're having this conversation, and it was so cool to see the bond and feel that as they were for each other, with each other in life, and they'd serve together and minister together, and it's just really cool. But even cooler, as kind of a realization, then as cool as that is, I looked across the table at Jack and realized, man, we met each other in college, and we were college students serving together one day. In fact, this week is the 40th anniversary of our friendship, which is pretty insane to think about, 40 years. 1985, I was a freshman in college. He was a senior, and we became friends and did youth ministry together in Alabama. And that's what got me here. He came to Dallas to go to Dallas Seminary, got involved in this church. When I came to Dallas a few years later to go to seminary, day one, literally, got out of the U-Haul truck and came into a Wednesday night youth meeting and never looked back, and have been involved in this place for 36 years now in all these different ways. And Jack and I have served together for 40 years. And just imagine the bond of the combination of longevity and serving together and praying together and celebrating together and lamenting together and being worried together and being elated together. I mean, all of it, that when you serve, and we've been there for each other and all the ups and downs and sideways of life. And since I've been in this church for 36 years, I'm also looking at many of you right now that have been in this church for a long time, and I've served with you. And it's just so cool, right, to have that bond that happens. It's one of the blessings of longevity and one of the blessings of serving together. And let me encourage you, many of you did step, like last week even. You said, man, I want to serve. Like, I want to get in the game. And what you're going to find is some of your closest relationships are going to come out of that decision. And if you're in a small group, I'm in a small group. We start meeting again past the summer. Meet together and talk together, but also serve together. As a family, I think it's a great thing to do too, to serve together. Get with some other families and with your kids and go to Local Good, one of the Local Good outlets. And I mean, this church makes it easier than anywhere that I know to get to do that. And so take advantage of that and serve, because it's a powerful connector. Shared mission. Another thing that bonded this group together that can bond us together as well is expressed affection. Meaning affection that you have that you actually express. Saying, I love you, or I appreciate you, and Paul did that. Like, when you read through Paul's letters, sometimes it feels a little over the top, like, come on, calm down. He's like, he'll say things like, oh, I long to see you, I haven't seen you in so long, and our hearts are knit, and I can't wait until we're together again, to Timothy, let's say. And you're like, okay, good for you, just, take a pill. But he was very expressive, and you see that in here too. Like, he could have just said, for example, to Rufus, he could have just said, hey, say hi to Rufus. But he doesn't. He says, say hi to Rufus, chosen in the Lord. He adds that. Now, that little phrase, what that would have meant to people listening to it 2,000 years ago is something like this. Say hi to Rufus, that God wisely chose, because Rufus is awesome. Which is different than just saying hi, Rufus. He does that with multiple people, though. He says, he uses these words of affirmation, like somebody who's outstanding among the apostles, another person whose fidelity has stood the test. multiple people, he says, who work very hard for the Lord or who work very hard for you, are chosen by God. Rufus, that we saw. He also says words of affection, like calls several people my dear friend, or a mother to me too, or beloved, a person that I love. He said words of affection and warmth and appreciation. But he not only said that, he also talks about even physical affection. Like he ends the thing saying, greet one another with a holy kiss, which is a biblical command. So turn to somebody next to you. No, don't. I don't want lawsuits. Just don't do that. You can do it later if you want when you get out of here. But in some cultures, that's still a thing. Like, 2,000 years ago, that was a culturally appropriate way to express affection. And they would kiss each other on the cheek and that with people that they were close with, a much broader group. And it was just a more physically affectionate than we are. And still, there's cultures that are more wired that way. For example, years ago, I was in the Ukraine for the first time. And I was pretty young in ministry, and I was so excited because I had the opportunity to meet with the head of the Baptist Union, a guy who was a legend. His name was Dukhanchenko. He'd been under communism in prison for decades and suffered deeply for his faith, but was a very just bigger than life kind of character. And so we're in his big office, and he's sitting behind his desk. I'm on the other side of the desk in a chair, and I'm really trying to pay attention because it's such a privilege to be able to interact with somebody like this, except I'm a little ADD, and I was a lot distracted because in the corner, there was this group of guys that, for one, had really impressive beards, like ZZ Top level beards. And they were eating lunch. And what they were eating was what we would call in Alabama fatback, which all that is a big chunk of pig fat with a little color of red somewhere in the middle, like bacon, but all fat, except maybe just a little bit of, meat in there somewhere. And it was over bread. And so they're eating this. Now, they have to really open their bearded mouths wide to do this. And when they do, when they eat the fat and mouth out, the grease just starts pouring down their beard. So just these big, greasy, ZZ Top kind of beards, okay? And now I have no idea what this guy's saying, but after a while, and he could tell. Because after a little bit, he's like, I should introduce you to these 5. They're pastors from a remote part of the country. And so they stood up to come meet me, and I put out my hand. But these greasy bearded guys, this first one comes right up to me, and the whole memo about this is supposed to be on the cheek, he did not get. So he planted one right on me, just on my lips. I did not see it coming, and it was shocking, traumatic, and I could feel the grease. And then I'm thinking, there's 4 guys left. I'm not great at math, but 4 guys left. And I have prayed a few times in my life intensely for Jesus to come back. That was one of them. Now, please, now. And because I figured in Rome, what am I going to do? It's their culture. I think now I'd say, I'm good. But back then, I just, all 5. And I got through it. I've been through a lot of counseling, and I'm good. But that's their culture. In Ethiopia, we've done a lot of work in Ethiopia. Now it's self-sustaining as a project. The project's still going on. They're doing a great job. But I've spent a lot of time in Ethiopia, and they're more demonstrative. Like I remember the first time walking down the street, and you see other people doing this, but they hold hands, like girls and guys that are friends will just hold hands and just walk down the street. I remember the first time one of them started holding my hand as we're walking, and we're like, well, I guess we're doing this. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if this is like I should run or if I'm okay. I don't know, but we're not a very physically demonstrative culture, or even a verbally demonstrative culture compared to lots of other cultures. Now, some of you are from cultures that are more like that, and we need you here. We need you to help us because most of us aren't, if we grew up. And so let me encourage us to up our game a little bit. Don't go crazy. Don't be inappropriate, but it's actually part of what bonds us. It's not just a result of bonding, it's actually part of what bonds us. We know that from brain science, the way God created us, now we can see it in our brains. That when somebody that you want to express affection, when somebody expresses affection, either verbally or even more importantly, or bigger, if there's physical, a touch or something like that combined with that, our brains become very active in a good way. For one, they produce oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone that makes us emotionally bonded to that person. Also, cortisol levels in our brain, stress hormones go down. We feel safe. And our bodies produce endorphins and dopamine that gives us feelings of well-being. All that goes on when somebody says, I love you, or somebody hugs you that you want to hug you, or whatever, right? Some kind of form of affection. And therefore, part of this thing is don't wait until you feel close to somebody to express affection, because actually expressing affection is part of what helps you feel close to somebody. Like in marriage, let's say, that's one, you should definitely be physically affectionate. And don't wait, but be affectionate. Like I remember, as pastors, do you ever wonder what pastors talk about when we get together, Usually it's not actually church stuff, but sometimes we do. And I remember years ago talking to a friend of mine, and we were sharing counseling stories. We don't share them by name, but he was telling me about this couple, and they were, the wife was complaining about her husband not being affectionate. You never say you love me, you never hold my hand, you never, whatever. And so this is what the husband said. He said, well, here's the thing. When we got married, I told you I loved you. And if I ever change my mind, I'll let you know. Not good, okay? So we can do better than that. So let's up our game, with friends. I'm not just talking about marriage, but, and again, be appropriate. But write the note. Make a phone call to say, hey, I was just thinking about you, and I really appreciate you. You're just a great friend, and I'm thankful for you. I thank God for you. And if there's some way I can be helpful, I'd love to know. How can I pray for you? Right? That's a big deal. Or even writing a physical letter. Imagine that. Or a text even. Like if you see somebody and you go to lunch or something, just at the end of lunch, just say, hey, thanks so much for spending time with me today. I really appreciated that. It meant a lot. All those things are bonders. Or hug somebody. Whatever, just express affection. It's a bonder. As well as this other one, which is really powerful, and this one may be the most powerful, and I'm gonna call it sacrificial love. But it's just love put in action, which actually love is an action, there's no other kind, but it's love that you put into action at cost to yourself. And when somebody does that, they do something for you, and you're like, wow, you did that for me? Or you were there for me when I had nothing to offer but trouble. It's a bonder, right? It's not just a result of bonder, it actually bonds us. And when you look at this list of people, they were people that Paul had sacrificed for and vice versa. For example, he talks about Phoebe. Phoebe's likely the one who gave the letter to Rome. So Paul wrote the letter. He was not in Rome. He wrote the letter to the Romans. She came home with this letter and gave it to the church. And she was a leader in the church. It says she was a deacon, which from 2,000 years ago, this is what I think as you put together the passages and all that. I don't think they called people pastors back then. You can call people whatever you want to. It's just methodology. But pastor was a gift more than a title 2,000 years ago. Now we call staff people pastors, and that's fine, no problem. But back then, they had elders and deacons, and I think what we call pastors at Chase Oaks, they would call deacons. But we'll talk about that later in the year, more specifically with women in ministry and all that. But she was a deacon in the church. So she was a key leader as well. She was a patron or a benefactor, he says. Now that Greek word translated patron or benefactor is a very clear thing 2,000 years ago what that was, and it was a big deal. So a patron in Roman culture was somebody who was very wealthy and connected. People talk today about patron of the arts, who support the arts, and they have a lot of money and they support the arts. But in Roman culture, it was way broader than that. Roman culture was actually built around that system of wealthy patrons, connected patrons, and everybody else. It was a patron-client culture, so what sociologists call it. So you had a few people at the top who were wealthy and connected, and their responsibility, if they were a responsible citizen in their system, was to lift other people up, use their wealth and connections for other people. And so you would be attached if you were not one of the patrons. Hopefully, there was a patron in your life who would connect you with other people, who would open doors for you, who might pay for your education or your kids' education. It was that kind of a deal. It's one of the reasons they had so many parties, is you would have these parties often thrown by patrons who would invite other patrons and invite normal people, and it was a way for normal people to be surrounded by and network with and have opportunities to get to know people that could really help them. So she was a patron. She was a wealthy, connected person. And she used her patronage in a very sacrificial way for Christians, because she was operating at a time where, as a wealthy Roman connected citizen, you would lose social capital by outing yourself as a Christian, or certainly helping other Christians. It was a time in Rome where Claudius was the emperor and Nero was the emperor. Claudius, as Christianity was growing, he got freaked out by it because Christians didn't worship the emperor and so on, and he expelled Christians from Rome for a while. Then came Nero, who was worse, and started these waves of persecution, horrible persecution against Christians, which ended Paul's life. He was beheaded eventually. So it was not safe, convenient, advantageous to be a patron of Christians. But despite that, she took that risk. She bore that cost. She sacrificed a lot. And that's why Paul says, yeah, man, she's worthy of law and honor because she was a patron. She's for you and for me, and that was a big deal. And that bonds, right? When somebody does something for you that's unexpected, you're like, whoa, why are you doing this? Because I care about you, right? That obviously is a bonder, as well as people who are there when being there is hard. When all you and I have to offer is trouble, Proverbs 15 says a true friend moves toward trouble when you're in trouble. They don't move away from you, they move towards you. And we have Priscilla and Aquila, another couple who was with him in prison. That was part of it, but also Priscilla and Aquila, we know a little bit more about. And what he says about this husband and wife that he had served with in Corinth and Ephesus, at some point he says, they risked their lives for me, was what one of the phrases we just read. They risked their lives for me. We don't know when, but at some point, they risked their lives for Paul in a way that he was still around. That's why he says right after that, and all the Gentile churches are thankful for that, because they got to hear about Jesus, because what Paul is saying is, I'd be dead without them. Now the phrase, the Greek phrase, original language of the New Testament, that's just smoothed out by saying they risked their lives for me, is literally a phrase that was used all the time back then, an idiom. And it's, they laid down their necks for me. Now that phrase is what would be used in, like when, as a soldier, if you were a soldier and you were surrendering to another soldier, an enemy, what you would do is you would bare your neck. And they had swords, right? And they had axes, and you're basically saying, yeah, do whatever. If you want to cut off my head, I'm yours. Like, I hope you don't. I hope I'll, but, whatever. They surrender. And it's a very vulnerable, risky thing. And that idiom is what Paul uses. They bared the neck for me. We don't know exactly what happened, but at some point they risked their lives for him. They were there for him when being there was really difficult. And we all know, right? I hope you can think of times in your life that you've experienced difficulty where somebody came in with you and helped you get through what you're going through, because it's hard to get through what we go through isolated. There's a classic illustration of that with an experiment that was done years ago. That's why I have this monkey. He's my emotional support monkey today. But one of the people I follow is Henry Cloud. He's a psychologist and an author. I get these emails from him. And I'm going to read one of those emails about this. He said this: one of my favorite studies was done years ago with monkeys, measuring the effects of relationships on cortisol levels in the brain. Cortisol is a hormone associated with high levels of stress. In this particular experiment, which is kind of sick, honestly, a monkey was put in a cage and exposed to a high level of psychological stress, including loud noises, flashing lights, shaking the cage. They pretty much scared him to death, which this is a good time to say, aw, little monkey. But when the monkey was totally terrified, the scientists took a baseline measure of stress hormone levels in the monkey's brain as it was exposed to all these stressors. So what's it like? Next, the researchers introduced one change into the experiment. They opened the door and put a buddy, another monkey, into the cage. That was it. They exposed the monkeys to the same loud noises and flashing lights, and then took another measure of stress hormones. The result, the level of stress hormones in the brain had dropped in half. The lone monkey was only half as good as handling stress as the pair was together. And then he says, so my question for you is, who's your monkey? Which is a great question to ask. Who's your monkey? I hope you have a monkey. I hope you have somebody who will get in the cage with you when your cage is shaken. Because life will guarantee that will happen. Life is hard, we know that. One day Jesus will come back, new heaven, new earth, it won't be that way anymore. But for now, life is hard. And you and I are not created to handle life on our own. We need other people who are willing to get in the cage with us. When I think about Jack and 40 years that I mentioned, he's one of those people that will get in the cage with me. And every time my cage has been shaken, pretty much, he's been there. I remember going through a season of depression. I think I would still be in that cage without him. Getting in there with me and just being there and encouraging me and helping me. We've been through seasons of loss, and he's always been there. And man, I'm grateful. And here's the thing about being in somebody's cage, and maybe you can think about somebody right now that their cage is shaken. And maybe you wonder, man, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I'm just, you're kind of staying away. Don't stay away. Get in their cage. Just come around them. It doesn't matter what you say. You have to say anything. Just be there. Or, you think, man, I don't know I can't really do anything. I don't know what to do. I've got a friend right now in that situation. And every time I'm with him, I feel like nothing's happening, but it doesn't matter. Just being there is strengthening, and being there is helpful. And I would, any way I could fix it, I'd fix it. Sometimes there are things we can do, and that's great, but it doesn't matter. Just get in the cage. And when you do that, it's not just a result of bonding, it's actually it's a huge part of what bonds us, right? When you think of people who've been there for you and being there was tough, you're like, oh man, that's a friend, right? That bonds people together. So I want us to put all this together because I believe what God wants and created us to experience for all of us. I want that for me, I want that for you, to have the kind of connections that Paul had. Like, this is a little snapshot of part of Paul's relational world. What would a snapshot or a selfie look like of your relational world? And how could you make that stronger? And I want you to think about just one or two people in your life, maybe, that you'd love to get closer to. And I don't know which of this makes sense. Is it shared mission? Is it like if you don't have these kind of relationships, maybe start serving, get on a team, because it's a great place to develop them. Get in a group. Groups are about to start. Take a step. If you're in a group or you're in a friendship or family or whatever, begin to serve together. Don't just hang out, but serve together. Maybe that's it. Or expressed affection. How can you up your affection game? Appropriately, but up your affection game. Give the hug. I just heard another person I follow, Simon Sinek, and I just heard yesterday, he was talking about how Disney trains their characters, the people who are their characters at Disney World, that they're not allowed to end a hug, that you let the child end a hug. That when a child, they don't initiate hugs, but when a child initiates a hug, they're like this, but when a child comes up and initiates a hug, then you keep hugging until they stop. I don't know what that means, but it means something, right? And so, or write the note, or say the thing, or even today, or sacrificial love. Is there a way to move towards somebody? Is there a way to help somebody, lift up somebody? Is there a way to be in the cage with somebody? And let me encourage you to take that step. Because God really wants us to experience the kind of bonding that Paul had. And And I believe he'll help us get there if we're willing to take some steps. So let's bow our heads together in prayer and ask for his help. And the most important connection we can have is with God. And the crazy thing is, the kind of connection he wants, he uses words like not just father or dad, it's words like friend. That he wants to be crazy close. And that's why Jesus came into this world. Jesus is God who came here and he died on the cross to take away the barrier that separated us and God, our sin, and so that we could be forgiven. In a relationship with God, not based on us being good enough for it, but realizing we're not. And his invitation is just come. Let's do this. Let's walk into a new life together. And some of you may be at a place that you're ready to say, God, yeah, I'm in. I want a relationship with you. And once you do that, as a friend, he'll never let you go. It's also an opportunity for us to think about our human friendships and relationships and marriages and other kinds of sibling and however you relate to somebody, kids, parents. And if God has put a relationship on your heart right now, just ask him, just say, God, what would it look like for me to help that relationship bond? What would you call me to do? Which of these things? God, just put it on my heart so that I can take that step and help me do it. And whatever God brings to mind, I encourage you to do it. And Father, I thank you that you love us, you want connection with us, and you want us to be connected with each other. In a world like this, it's hard, but I know you'll help us, and we thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.